Well, should I start or my people are joining?
Yep, you can start.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. I'm State Senator Shelley Mayer, representing the 37th Senate District. It's really my sad honor, I would say, to host this event tonight on where do we go from here? Learn how you can help change laws and stop the epidemic of gun violence. And really what prompted this meeting tonight was the number of emails and calls I received from people in my district, about half of the county of Westchester that I represent, who reached out and said, we really can't sit by idly. We are concerned for our children. We are concerned for our grandmothers. Please help us figure out what we can do and let us be part of something that is going to change something. The gun violence of the last month in the United States and even last night in Philadelphia is totally unacceptable. And we as Americans, and also as mothers and fathers and people who have loved ones, we can't stand idly by. So I was prompted by them, and you'll hear from some of them tonight. I do want to mention that one thing that is good about New York is that we have already taken very strong steps to limit gun violence here. They weren't strong enough, and we took more steps in the last week. But after Sandy Hook, we passed one of the strongest anti-assault weapons bills in the nation right here in New York, called the SAFE Act. And you know, people sometimes complain that the legislature passes bills at 3 in the morning. And I always remember thinking to myself, I'm so glad we passed it at 3 in the morning, because if we had waited till the next day, the other side would have organized and we wouldn't have had the votes to pass it. And on my wall, I was in the assembly then representing only Yonkers. I have an email from a man in my district who was a member of the NRA, who after Sandy Hook sent me an email saying he withdrew his membership and he supported my vote. I don't think he was someone who agreed with me about much of anything, but he knew that this was an issue that is not a political issue. This is not a partisan issue. This is truly an American issue and an American problem. I do want to mention what happened in the last week so people know that in response to what happened in Buffalo and in response to what happened in Texas, the New York State Legislature took strong action. And I'll just mention a few of the bills that we passed last week that hopefully are going to be signed quickly by the governor. Most important to me was a change in the sale of semi-automatic rifles. You're going to have to be 21, not 18 anymore. And that was something I did hear from the people in my district. Don't let these 18-year-old kids buy these weapons of war and use them in our community. And so we did that. We set up a permitting system for buying a semi-automatic rifle. You're going to have to apply like you do for a pistol permit and go through a lengthy, I looked at the questionnaire online, it's about 15 pages, and it requires a lot of background information. That is a big change and a good change. And you remember that from Buffalo, that 18-year-old bought that weapon of war. The other thing relevant to Buffalo and so important is we're going to require when the police have a knowledge that a person is a danger to themselves or others, they must file the papers for an extreme risk protection order. So in that case, you recall the state police investigated this guy because of complaints, and yet thereafter he bought a gun. Now we're saying once they do that, if he gets the permission to get a gun, they have to go right to court and seek a judge's order to say this person should be determined whether they are safe to have a gun. That is a big change that we made in New York. It's very important. We also, we changed the ability to buy body armor. For people who are not first responders, police, fire sometimes, state police, people who have military obligations, that's one thing. But for people to come into a store like that man did in Buffalo with full body armor, like ready for war, we're going to not allow that to occur. And that was another change. One thing that I think many people will think is important, we are requiring social media to have a place where you can report hateful speech. You can report it. Doesn't mean it's going to go away. We have free speech and we have lots of problems with it. But you're going to have a place on social media in New York where you can report it. There's many other things we did. We did 10 important bills that passed the Senate and the Assembly, and I believe the governor will sign them all. But my point is, when we are unified, we can make a difference in legislation. But the thing we don't have is a federal law that bans assault weapons. We had one at one time. We'll talk about it tonight. It expired. And one of the things I want tonight to do is give people a sense that there is work we can do together to get both stronger federal laws. We're going to have to work on it to make sure our communities at home are safe. And we have people talking about that. And that there is an opportunity to make change. We can't let this moment go by without taking advantage of it. So let me just mention those who are here tonight. We have a lot of wonderful speakers. Mary Cassels is one of the women who wrote me and I spoke to, who prompted me to do this. She's going to speak. She's a mom of 4 children from 8 to 2, and she's also an RN, and she's currently a nurse practitioner who lives in Eastchester. And thank you, Mary, for reaching out. Jack Kelly is the organizing director for March for Our Lives and a contributing author. He's still in high school, I would add, to the book Adolescent Gun Violence Prevention, Clinical and Public Health Solutions. He's been working on gun violence prevention for 4 years, at least 4 years. He's going to talk about it tonight. And I know when I was running previously after the mass shooting in the high school in Florida, he was an activist and someone who demanded that people give answers about gun violence. And that was in 2018. We are joined by Dr. Nancy Dodson, who is a volunteer leader with the Hudson Valley chapter of New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, and Natalie Tavithia from New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, and Naomi Marrow from Moms Demand Action, which is a national group with also a state group that you can join and you can be part of and be part of this movement at the national level. I am hopeful we're going to be joined by Nadine Mckenzie, the mother of Shamoya Mckenzie, who was killed by gun violence on New Year's Eve in 2016 at the age of 13, a fantastic young woman with everything before her. And her mother has organized and kept her memory alive with a foundation that is very focused on gun violence in our communities. Minister Mark Mclean, who is the president of the New Rochelle chapter of the NAACP, as well as the Interreligious Coalition of New Rochelle, someone I work closely with on issues of violence in the city of New Rochelle. Rosanna Constante, the community organizer of the Community Resource Center, which is a powerhouse group that represents much of our Latino community in Mamaroneck and elsewhere, is going to talk about how this issue affects the immigrant community, which is so significant in our world. And Lisa Hoffleck, who is a mother of 5, a community organizer, and most recently served as Senator Kirsten Gillibrand's special advisor on Asian American Pacific Islanders, and is going to talk about that community's challenges and what it really means to be threatened by gun violence. So with that, and I know there'll be time for questions, and we have a lot on the plate. I think we'll start with Mary, who reached out, as I said. And Mary, if you can talk a little bit about what prompted you and how I suspect you speak for many other people in our community who think this is the moment they have to speak up, but I'll let you say it in your own words.
Thank you so much. Hi, yes, my name is Mary Cassels. I'm a mom of 4. I have an 8-year-old, 6-year-old, 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So 2 of my kids. 2 of my kids are in elementary school. I also work full time. I've been a nurse for 11 years, and I'm currently a nurse practitioner. I have never reached out to any politician in the past. And after the Buffalo shootings and the Uvalde, Texas shootings, I just felt like there has to be something that myself or my friends, other moms in the community can do. And I really just didn't know what that was. As I explained to you on the phone when we spoke, I'm a registered Republican, and I understand that there are people that believe in the Second Amendment right, but it just doesn't make any sense to me that an 18-year-old can go and get a machine gun and yet can't can't legally get a drink of alcohol, right? The two just don't coincide, and it just doesn't make any sense. And so I'm not sure what the answer is. I love that all of these stricter gun laws are being passed in New York, but unfortunately, if they're not passed, or some of them aren't passed at a national level, people can just walk over into Pennsylvania and buy a gun, bring it back to New York just as easily as they could get fireworks, like we all know that people do. You know, it's just kind of really saddening. I can't imagine what the parents are going through in Uvalde, Texas. And, you know, after that shooting, I think the schools were kind of rebooting and kind of practicing maybe lockdowns again. So my 8-year-old daughter came home from school and she said, "Oh, mommy, we had a lockdown today." And I said, "Oh, okay, what does that mean?" And she said, "Oh, my hiding spot is in the closet behind the book bags." And she really just has no idea the gravity behind what that means, and I don't want to tell her. And I don't think that they should have to be doing that, and to say that it's only a mental health problem is really ignorant. And I think irresponsible of the people that say, "Oh, it's mental health, it's not the guns." So I guess I'm here today because I want to know what I can do. I want to know what I can tell my friends who are also very upset and don't know how they can help. But thank you for having me, and thank you for hearing my concerns.
Thank you, Mary. And I read part of your email on the floor of the Senate when I was speaking about particularly the 18 to 21-year-old issue, because I know that's so very, very significant. Thank you so much for instigating this. So Jack, I'll turn it over to you as a young person who got involved and has stayed involved. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, totally. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Jack Kelly. I work with March for Our Lives. I'm 18 years old. I first got involved with this issue on a local level, but got really involved with this issue at Parkland. So February 14th, 2018. I remember coming home that day and the news was on, and I pulled myself a seat over for the kitchen as the thing was being live streamed, and sat for almost 3.5 hours just watching the news in horror with what was going on. And what was so terrible about this is that happened and I was so disheartened, but now it's happened again and again. And now I still feel the same disheartening feeling, but now there's a sense of desensitization that this is just the norm, that this is America, that this is the status quo. And myself and other young people often feel that we can no longer accept this, that we shouldn't have to worry about going to school. I often tell people I should be more scared about my calculus exam than I should be about the safety and conditions of our school. And so the young people and myself and so many other amazing people I get to work with are really helping to drive this change, because we recognize that for so long, this has been a uniquely American issue. And what's so shameful about this is I have friends in other parts of the world, especially going to college, meeting people from around different parts of the world where this isn't a problem where they are, but it is a problem where I am. And it really is so sad to me. And I know that the New York legislature has the opportunity to really act and lead on this. And I've definitely gained faith every time I see a good bill. I've been to a number of the signings myself where I see this legislation gets advanced and lives are saved because of that legislation, but we need more even than what we've already done. And this can't just be incumbent upon the state of New York, because as has already been mentioned on this call, borders are things that can be crossed quite easily. And when you have the iron pipeline, it makes it very difficult, and it exacerbates a lot of problems we have with gun violence. So I guess I'm just here to remind everyone that like we young people are watching, and it's so sad to see people even younger than myself are growing into this place where it's becoming even more and more the norm. And we're always advocating that this should not be the way that any child, any student goes to school. And so we thank everyone when they take action, and we implore them to take even more action because it's necessary, and it saves lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. And you set the table so beautifully for Nancy and Naomi to talk about this issue, which Mary also touched on and I talked about, which is that we do not have federal laws that really deal with this issue in a way that meets the moment and meets a moment that is long overdue. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dodson. I'm calling her doctor. She said not to. Nancy Dodson is an adolescent medicine doctor who works in Hastings on Hudson. She's been involved in gun violence prevention work for the past decade at the grassroots level, as well as working to educate other physicians. She's published on this topic and currently serves as the chapter leader for the Hudson Valley chapter of New Yorkers Against Gun Violence. And Naomi Marrow, a very active volunteer, which is everyone at Moms Demand Action. There's her red shirt, and I'm wearing orange today, on purpose, is actively involved and has been with things that I've seen in advocacy on a number of fronts, including gun violence prevention. She's been in leadership positions on the boards of several not-for-profits and retired after a corporate career as a senior human resource professional. And I know they're joined by Natalie Tavithia as well, but I'm going to turn it over to you. I think you're going first, right, Dr. Dodson? Nancy, is that right? Oh, Naomi's going first. Okay, so unmute yourself, Naomi.
Okay, yeah, Naomi's gonna kick us off, I think.
Rachel, are you going to put up the slides?
Nancy, can you share, Naomi, could you share your screen and put the slides up that way? And then Nancy can do hers as well.
Can you do that? Okay, while you're doing that, while someone is doing that who is better equipped than I am. I'm a woman of the last millennium, guys, catch up. We're here today, and thank you, Shelley, for inviting us. It's an honor to be here because we want to talk to you about what our organizations are.
Hold on 1 minute. Let's try to work out the slide thing.
I'm working on it.
Okay, because I think the slides really show some of the numbers. Can you,
Yeah.
Nancy?
I think I'm gonna do it. Let's see.
There we go. Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank
go ahead.
you.
2 years into a
Naomi.
pandemic, I've got this. I've got this.
Okay, Naomi.
Nancy, can you control when we go to the next slide? I'll put
Yeah.
up my hand. Okay. We wanted to talk to you about who we are as organizations. Firstly, how we operate and what we're trying to accomplish. And then, very importantly, what you can do to be part of this movement and move us away from the horrific statistics that I'm going to show you next. So hang on, folks. It used to be, when I joined Moms about 4 years ago, it was 100 people a day in this country who were killed with guns. Well, we've inflated that now to 110. This doesn't account for the 200 a day who are wounded physically, not to mention emotionally, which then gets into tens of thousands, if not more, who are traumatized because they knew, they saw, they heard, they felt they were part of the community where people were injured or worse. And this level of trauma, never mind, and I'll talk about survivors in a moment, never mind those at ground zero who are a part of it, but everyone has in the back of their minds what is happening. And Shelley referred to this a bit also. We used to be able to go almost anywhere and feel safe. And now you can't send your children to school, go to the park, go to Walmart, go just about anywhere and feel like you're not under threat, irrespective of whomever you are. My joke is that when I used to go to the movies, I would check where the ladies' rooms were, being a woman of a certain age. I now check where the exits are. And I don't think I'm clinically paranoid, but you all can weigh in on that. I think it's a level of uncertainty. I mean, this past weekend, it was 4 events that could all be classified as mass shootings. This is insane. Okay, back to the slide. If you are the parent of a child who is about to get their license or did get it, you're worried about their driving a car and a mishap occurring. Firearms being shot has taken over by about 25% being worse. Okay, Nancy. COVID-19 escalated the danger dramatically. And we can talk about why and how, but there used to be 300 million guns in this country. 1 per person. Now we're at 400 million. I don't know what we're supposed to be doing with all these. And I don't resent responsible adults having guns for a range of reasonable motivations. But the lack of reasonableness and the quickness to move from aggressive words to pulling out a gun and shooting is dangerous for our society, our values, and our democracy. Thank you. Okay, New York numbers. 900 New Yorkers killed by gun violence every year. The number of suicides, 54%, are by guns, and Nancy will talk about that in a little while. 65% of the homicides are in communities of color, even though Blacks are only 15% of the population. Hispanics, Asian American, Pacific Islanders, everybody is vulnerable, and those populations are more vulnerable. There also is no reason for hate to hit the streets armed with guns. And you see here the statistics around the pandemic shootings and the increases in New York State. It is just rocketing up. And I told Nancy and Natalie a little earlier today, somebody put on Facebook, and I wanted to check out if it was real, that if you want to get toys for your toddlers for birthdays or holidays, you can go online. And I'm not talking about obscure online. I'm talking about Amazon and others. And you can get a facsimile of an AR-16 in pink for a toddler or in multicolors for a boy. I don't know what to say about that. That is a profit motive gone completely berserk. Yeah, we can write to them and we can embarrass them into taking them off the market, but there's a much bigger problem, Minister Mclean, as you had mentioned earlier before the meeting. Nancy? Okay. We refer to survivors, and Nadine Mckenzie is a survivor. Moms Demand Action puts a huge amount of effort into working with survivors because they are absorbing trauma like no one else, other than the person who died. It stays with them, it overpowers them, they fight back magnificently, but it weighs on them to a huge degree. Moms Demand Action wants them to know that they are not alone. We share their stories, hoping that they will have an impact on both mothers, family members, community members, to try to dissuade others from violence. And there are 2 examples right here on your screens. If you know a survivor, if you are a survivor and need a community of survivors to work with you, and many of the survivors have commented that it has been magnificently helpful to them, relieving some of the strain. Text survivor 64433. Okay, Nancy. All right, again, who we are as Moms Demand Action, and probably very similar to New Yorkers Against Gun Violence and other groups. We want to pass, and we have, with the help of our legislators, God bless them, stronger gun laws, closing the loopholes. It shouldn't take 3 days to have your credentials checked about whether you can get a gun license. The federal law that is up for consideration should be 10 days. Most of the background checks in New York are cleared within 3 days. But then there are those that get in under the wire, and that's dangerous, very dangerous. We believe strongly, we know that gun violence is preventable, and I'll come back to that in a moment. We work with leaders across our communities to erase the culture of gun violence and make sure that it is not the guns that we need to control per se. It is making sure that they are only in the hands of responsible adult owners and that they keep them locked up appropriately. Guns over here, ammo over there, and people can't willy-nilly get to them. We are totally committed to making our society safe again. American exceptionalism should not be eroded by gun violence, and that is not whom we should be known or what we should be known for around the world. Yes.
Hi, so I'm Nancy, and I'm going to talk about New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, which is, a bit of a sister organization in the state. We really are on the same path and working towards the same goals as Moms Demand Action, and we're way more alike than we are different. New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, our mission is to reduce gun violence through legislative advocacy and education designed to encourage action, influence public opinion, and lead to policy change. As our name states, we have a primary focus on New York State, but we also advocate at the local and national levels for laws because we know that borders are porous. And we advocate for policies and practices that protect New York State residents, particularly youth, from gun violence. And I think the focus on youth really speaks to me. As a pediatrician, I only take care of teenagers, and this is a population really mostly affected by gun violence compared to all other age groups of children. So I really, I feel that their mission is just child focused and youth focused, and it really is quite meaningful. That end, New Yorkers Against Gun Violence has under its wing a youth organization called Youth Over Guns, which is a grassroots movement that was organized in spring of 2018 after the shooting in Parkland, Florida. And the goal of Youth Over Guns is to shed light on the effects of gun violence on marginalized communities, and particularly communities of color. And so shortly after being formed, they paired with New Yorkers Against Gun Violence and became sort of the youth arm of our organization. And it's amazing. There are just young people in this group that have become leading spokespeople on the impact of gun violence on communities of color, and they continue to advocate, educate, train, galvanize their youth colleagues to become leaders. And so, I think they're going to take the torch from us one day, and they already frankly have the torch. So that's the youth arm of New Yorkers. I think right now I'm passing it back briefly to Naomi.
Okay, our New York State Legislature, when it went majority, supermajority Democratic, and I'm not saying this to be partisan, we're a 501c3, we are not, but the bulk of the reason behind the impressive common sense gun violence prevention laws, we have to find a catchy way to say that. It's because we've had a supermajority in the legislature. Just look at this list. ERPA, red flag laws. So if you believe someone is dangerous and you know they have a gun, dangerous to others or self, you can call the police and get a court order to have that gun removed for 30 days through a legal due process. Police aren't going to burst into the house and rip your gun away. And we need this done on the federal level. We haven't talked about it, but 3D printed guns, AKA ghost guns, Shelley, you mentioned it the other day, I believe. They get through security checkpoints because there is veritably no metal in them. And you can make them at home if you have a smattering of skill within a couple of hours. And if you don't, YouTube will tell you how to do it. I mean, they are very, very dangerous. And God help the police when these people are carrying homemade weapons. Bump stocks, Las Vegas. Let's see. And just now, and Shelley went through some of them, the permitting of assault rifles, you have to be 21, how you do that. Grandfathering high capacity magazines, which allow massive damage in an eye blink. Crimes that threaten mass harm against individuals. We need all of these to stay in effect and be implemented evenly across New York. And thank you. I know you stayed up till 3:30 in the morning the other night.
That's well worth it. It was well worth it. And thank you so much. I do want to mention that, Naomi, do you have more on there?
No, I wanted Nancy to go on to the
Oh,
next.
Nancy, I just want to interrupt to say that we had quite a debate on these bills. And it was actually quite disappointing to me. And I mentioned it in my remarks that I read Mary's email without her name as an example of someone who just reached out. And I said to my colleagues, I can't believe that you don't have mothers or fathers or people whose grandmothers went shopping on a Saturday afternoon in Buffalo and were killed simply because they were Black and in a supermarket. I can't believe these people aren't writing you as well. And I'm sure they are. And it was very disappointing that none of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle on the big bills voted with us. They did on some of the more modest things, but I do think this cannot be a partisan issue. This has to be an issue where people do the right thing. And I think many people saw that this incumbent congressman from Western New York, who represents Buffalo, who came out, who's a Republican, came out for an assault weapons ban this week, was basically no longer the candidate for. So we need to run again. So we need people to have courage, and we need people to do things that are difficult and worry less about being reelected than doing the right thing, regardless of partisan. This cannot be a partisan issue. It should not be, but enough from me on that. I'm going back to Nancy.
Okay, I'll pick up for Nancy there. I'll be Nancy. We are very much, both of us, data-based organizations. We have statistics. So when you look at the good work done in Albany to pass gun safety laws, you see we're the third strongest in the nation with the fifth lowest rate of gun violence. California and Hawaii lead, and there are other stats from the Midwest, and it's picking up steam. That gives us hope. It makes a difference.
Okay, so I just wanted to review our federal priorities, which are largely shared by the two organizations. They largely fall into three categories. The first category is keeping guns out of the hands of people who are dangerous, at least in the moment. And I sort of want to keep the emphasis on that. Probably the single most effective piece of legislation that we could pass would be just a comprehensive airtight background system nationally that requires a background check on every single gun sale. And then, you can take a moment and read the entire list of this first category. I'm going to be talking specifically about national red flag laws, which are also called ERPO laws, extreme risk protection order laws. The second category is making guns less dangerous. As prior speakers have mentioned, we're hoping to reinstate the assault weapons ban. There is very clear research published. It was published in, I think, 2017, looking at sort of data from the gun industry over the past 20 years or more. And what it found is that really since 2005, especially, the share of guns manufactured in this country that are the most lethal and the most concealable has really increased. So just the stockpile of guns, those 400 million guns in our country right now in civilian hands, are just with each passing year getting more lethal and highly concealable. The third, and that just, it chills you to the bone. You know, I think there's a lot of mothers on this panel talking about the fear they feel sending their children to school or to the supermarket, and that is a chilling fact to me. The third category is reducing gun violence in Black and Brown communities. And again, you can read the list, but probably the most meaningful piece of legislation that we would be hoping for would be the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Because we do know that, you know, that police violence is gun violence as well. So I do want to talk quickly about, this is sort of a little mini lecturette, and I will keep it very brief, but I did want to talk about the question of mental health access, because I think this is a point where people get stuck when they talk about gun violence reduction. There are voices out there that say, why don't we focus on mental health? Access to mental health is what we need, not stronger gun laws. And I think we should just sort of talk frankly and honestly about it. And I do want to say that I bet most of the people on this panel actually really care about mental health and do want really good mental health services for people, because we want everybody to enjoy, you know, just a good psychological health and to not be suffering and to live their fullest life. It's a big part of my job is actually to care for the mental health of teenagers. And since the pandemic, even more of my job is to care for the mental health of teenagers. So it's something I take very seriously. But we need to ask, is there a mental health policy that would be enacted that would significantly reduce gun deaths on its own? You know, would improving mental health access actually reduce the number of people in our country dying from guns? Because it's that link that I think where it becomes weak, and we really do have to focus on the firearm itself. So in the interest of time, I just wanted to kind of share one nugget of the research with you, because, you know, when Mary at the beginning of the talk was saying that there are a lot of, you know, moms that she knows sort of asking what to do. Sometimes I think it's really helpful to just sort of have that nugget of truth to share with people when it's time to engage people. And so I think this is a really easy one to wrap your head around and to take with you after this talk. So there's one of, I think, the most telling studies was actually an ecological experiment, which means it wasn't done on purpose. It wasn't like someone designed a study to study the outcome. It was just something that happened in a society, and then we could see the outcome of what happened. So it was like not even intentional. And so it happened in Israel in the early 2000s. And, you know, the Israeli Defense Force, you basically have a very interesting setup where almost the entire youth population of a country is issued a firearm for a certain period of their life. And what the Israeli Defense Force was finding was that there was a very high rate of suicide among soldiers. And when they looked at what was driving the suicide rate, they noted that soldiers were dying by gun suicide, and they were dying on weekends when they were off duty. And this kind of makes sense if you think about sort of like what happens on a weekend. Like that's when people drink, that's when they break up, that's when emotions run high, that's when their defenses are down. So they took a very pragmatic step, and in 2006 they said from now on soldiers will not be taking their guns home with them when they're off duty on weekends. It was that straightforward. It was Saturday and Sunday. Soldiers will not take their guns home with them. And so did this actually save lives? Well, this led to a 40% decrease in suicides among soldiers in the Israeli army, which I just think is just an amazing statistic. And it's really hard to picture any one mental health policy that could be passed that would lead to a 40% reduction in suicide and just the number of lives that have been saved because of that. It's a really just profound finding, and it shows the power of limiting access to lethal methods of suicide during high-risk times of someone's life.
And Nancy, as soldiers, they know how to kill themselves. They know how to be lethal if they think about it. But this is a timeline.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And these are people that had training and gun safety training for sure, but it was just in that moment of despair, that breakup or that fight or, whatever it was, having that within arm's length. So this result actually really lines up with what we know about suicidality in young people. Suicidality is really, a lot of times people think that it happens only in people who are chronically depressed and have chronic suicidal thinking over weeks to months to years. But that's really not the typical person who attempts suicide. Suicide happens through fleeting moments of despair. And when you talk to people who have attempted suicide and you ask them, how long were you thinking about it? About half of the time people say 1 day or less. A lot of people say 1 hour. About a quarter of the time they say 5 minutes or less. And particularly the younger you are, the less time you're thinking about it. So again, this is an extremely impulsive act. And if people can just be kept away from something lethal for that even hour, sometimes 1 hour, it will make the difference and their thinking will clear up and they will go on to not be suicidal. The most deadly thing a suicidal teen can reach for is a gun. And so if you look at how deadly a gun actually is, out of 100 teens who attempt suicide with a gun, 83 or more will die, and the remainder will really, really be badly, gravely injured with terrible brain injuries, but 83 will never make it to the hospital. And if you look at teens who use pills, for example, 2 out of 100 will die, meaning what's the flip side of that? 98 out of 100 will go on to live their lives and most likely not be suicidal in the future and not go on to die by suicide, but they'll go on to live their life and die from all the other things, when they get old and they get to live nice long lives, which is the goal. So it's really a focus. If you can just focus on the how and not the why of suicide, you will really save lives. I started with suicide because suicide takes up about 2/3 of gun deaths in our country. It's really probably underappreciated of what a big problem it is. But we also need to talk about gun violence towards other people, including homicides, including mass shootings. Because there's also a belief out there that if we just had better mental health, that we'd have less gun violence towards other people. But it's really not borne out by the research. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, if you look at who commits violent crime in our country, 4% or less are committed by people with a diagnosed mental health condition. That means 96% of violent crime is committed by people without a diagnosed mental illness. And sometimes people just because it sort of makes sense instinctively, people with depression or anxiety or schizophrenia must be the ones committing gun violence, but those really are not the culprits. The culprits in terms of gun violence towards other people are pathologic anger and impulsive behavior. And those just are not traits that show up in a mental health evaluation. That's sort of not a reason that people really seek out mental health. And it's just another reason why the mental health conversation becomes a red herring when it comes to saving lives. If you think about gun violence, just think about the headlines that you read. And if you keep in mind the anger issue, you'll notice that anger really is the theme that unites all of these tragedies. If you think about intimate partner violence, right? One of the most dangerous things in a woman's life would be an armed and angry boyfriend or husband. Community violence by and towards teen boys and young men. A lot of the violence that happens in communities of color, it actually not only affects, not only is the person who has shot and killed a young person, but a lot of times the person committing the act is a young person. And it happens through, youthful anger. But unfortunately, there's a gun in that moment. Road rage. We're seeing an increase in road rage killings, especially since the pandemic, because driving is worse, people are angrier, there's more speeding, and people are more armed. And that's driven by anger and impulsive behavior. And then public tragedies such as Buffalo. If you sadly think back on our long list of mass shootings, a lot of times it's driven by anger towards a specific group, towards a racist hate, misogynistic hate, homophobic, anti-Asian hate. I mean, it's actually a really depressingly long list that you can almost come up with hate towards every group as fueling one of the major mass shootings. And so that's sort of another reason why mental health is a red herring, and it's really armed, angry people committing these acts. which is what brings me to extreme risk protection order laws, or red flag laws. So, I mean, the reason this law, which exists in New York State, we're hoping to have strengthened, and we hope to have nationally, is such a just research-based solution, and it would save so many lives. Many states have implemented ERPO laws, including Florida, and they've actually called on it thousands of times to prevent people from having guns during high-risk times in the state of Florida. And really what this law says is, if you're having a high-risk time, if you are showing signs of suicidality, if you're making frightening comments on social media, we're going to have to take your gun for a little while until you're in a better place. And it's truly actually a really loving gesture, and it's a compassionate gesture. I really think of it like the designated driver culture, which used to not be a thing, and now it's a thing. And there's no judgment involved in being a designated driver or in taking somebody's keys. It's something that's become part of our culture, and a way of saying that I care about you is to take your keys during this high-risk time for you to drive. ERPO laws are really the same idea. And if we can think about it the same way that we've decreased drunk driving deaths, we could decrease gun deaths by making this part of the culture. Let me take your guns for you. It looks like you're having a hard time. You know, that's really the spirit of the ERPO laws. So
Nancy, how many more slides? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, good question. I think that is my last one. Hold on. That's my last one. I just have one little
Oh, okay, go ahead.
slide. Okay, so our organization is working towards a nationwide law, and then to expand and streamline our state ERPO law so that it's easier to implement when someone is in crisis. Lastly, Naomi made reference to the statistic that firearms are now the #1 cause of injury and death for children. And I just want to point to this graph from the New England Journal, because I actually want you to take away a nugget of hope from it. Yes, the blue line going up is depressing, but the red line going down is really hopeful. And it really shows that if you put your mind to public health solutions and you're just pragmatic and focused on the well-being of children as your outcome, look at this progress that you can make. You can actually save lives. So thank you all. I'm gonna turn it back over to the group.
Thank you so much, Nancy and Naomi. Naomi, you want to say something more?
Nancy, would you go to the next slide or two, just really quickly? So the what can you do?
Oh, very important. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Nathan, do you want to come back to that at the end?
Yeah, I think we're gonna come back to these at the end.
Okay, sure.
This is like our last little bit, yeah.
But thank you. And thank you for being so substantive about both the mental health and the specifics, which, really are. And at the end, we'll talk about things that people can do. And I think that will be helpful. So next, we're going to turn, there we go, to Minister Mark Mclean, who's going to talk a little bit about his views about gun violence, and particularly in communities of color, I hope. And I'm sure he will, as well as all of our communities representing New Rochelle.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all the information about the one aspect of trying to gain more legislation, gun control legislation. But as I stated earlier, I think we will be missing the point if we have a myopic approach to solving this violence in our community, especially in the African-American community, just focusing on one thing. I always bring the Colin Powell approach to any problem, is that we have to overwhelm it and we have to fight it on many different levels. For someone who has been with families that had to go and view their only child who had lost their lives from gun violence, for someone who had to preach funerals for young people, in their 20s for losing lives from gun violence, I am very painfully aware of the deleterious effect that violence has in all our communities, and in particularly the African-American community. And it is a comprehensive problem. I think one of the main reasons, or one of the foundational reasons for violence that has inundated our communities is the disintegration of the family. statistically, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, 18.4 million children, that's 1 out of every 4, live in a household that has no biological step or adoptive father in the home. And that has a very, very negative effect on that life, the life of that child and the community in which those homes exist. And so we have to take an approach that not only focuses on gun control legislations, but also focuses on family support, poverty, eradicating poverty and hunger in our community. We also have to speak as a minister of the gospel. We also have to speak about nurturing our families and our kids with a spiritual approach and a respect for life. And so we at the NAACP and my church, Generation Church, where I serve as an elder, we and the Interreligious Coalition, we seek to have partnerships with the city to identify and government, people like Senator Shelley Mayer, to identify programs that will, holistically build up the community and family. So we have a vocational training program that teaches introduces young people to vocational trades, 14 to 17-year-olds, called the Booker T. Washington Vocational Institute. We also have worked with the city, in particularly the Department of Development, and have produced a comprehensive training program for younger people to find jobs in this development boom, where we train them, give them construction training, and help small businesses, give them the capacity to win government bids. So if we bolster the economic environment of our communities, then we are actually helping to curb violence, because a job is the greatest social program that you can give a young person. We also deal with helping young people in terms of civic education, the NAACP, and we try to help them in educational initiatives, tutoring. We're working with Shelley to pass a African-centric curriculum for the state of New York. So we've done a whole lot of things in terms of trying to solve the problem, to uplift the community, and solve the problem of violence in our community. And I would say that, yeah, the George Floyd Act is something, but the fact of the matter is that gang violence is more of a threat to young African American lives than police violence. And so there's a gang violence to try to curb the influence of the gang culture. We also working with Shelley to bring the SNUG program to New Rochelle, which would help in terms of getting the guns out of the hands of young people, oftentimes who are engaged in gangs. And so there has to be a comprehensive approach, an overwhelming approach where we are fighting on many levels to deal with this problem. And so it's encouraging to hear those initiatives in terms of legislation, gun control legislation, but also I would encourage you to join in terms of the fight on other levels, so that we can be sure that we solve the problem. of violence that is really overtaking our young people in all the communities. And so, thank you for your efforts, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Minister Mclean, and I appreciate your broad view, and I think, everyone, certainly I share that, and I think most of the participants share that, and we have a lot of work to do on this is a collective effort of many types. The shocking thing that happened, because Buffalo was so brazen, and what happened in Texas was so it was like Sandy Hook in that, this going into a school with young innocent babies. These are things that shock the conscience and force us to sort of say galvanize together. So thank you for bringing the broader perspective. Very, very much appreciate that. Now, briefly, I'm going to I'm going to hand it over to Rosanna Constante. And Rosanna, if you would talk a little bit about sort of these issues in the Latino community within our community. Each of our communities has different challenges, and in a community where issues of immigration and concern with people in authority who pose risks to people has made it even more difficult to get a handle on this. So very much anxious to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you so much, Senator Rima. Thank you for reminding me to speak at this panel. My name is Rosanna Constante, and I'm the community organizers of CRC, Community Resource Center. The CRC serves the immigrant and the low-income community of Mamaroneck and the surrounding areas. From my experience, I can share that I have great admiration from community resilience, strength, and desire to move forward, because they are coming from a global pandemic that brought deaths, job losses, and emotional instability, among others. On the top of that, Hurricane Ida impacted approximately 300 families, causing them to lose everything, including their homes. So now I can say that our community is severely affected by unexpected events and the fear about what would be the next prevalent. This fear and uncertainty have been intensified by recent events like mass shootings in schools, and communities of color are targets of violence and hatred. New York is considered a safe place by many immigrants, but unfortunately, the sense of safety has been undermined by horrific acts. The community is afraid and concerned about their safety and their children's. Immigrant families, especially the undocumented, don't have access to the lack of resources to cope with those feelings. The Community Resource Center has helped connect concerned families with local law enforcement to address their concerns and fears, associated, of course, with hate crimes and deportation. On June 2nd, we held a community forum about mental health, crisis management, and physical safety in response to unexpected events such as mass shootings. The community expresses their concerns about violent acts against children. One of the participants said that accessing weapons should be regulated, and those willing to buy arms should be investigated. Another participant spoke about the possibility of increasing the age limit so young people couldn't buy guns. In addition, schools should be better protected, and school cars should be better equipped and trained in those type of situations. Now, the community is still struggling with what happened in Uvalde, Texas. They are not calm. They are asking for actions to address these problems. Living like this, Senator, is not living. Living without safety is surviving. Let's everybody advocate for keeping our community safe. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Rosanna, and thank you for making that point. This really does affect the immigrant community and the African American community. And next we'll hear from Lisa a little bit about the impact of the increasing hatred in the Asian American Pacific Islander community especially during COVID and since then, and how these issues they really do affect every community, and we need a collective solution. So Lisa?
Thank you, Senator Mayer. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak on this panel also. And I echo everything that everyone said before me about how this epidemic of gun violence has to be stopped. So my name is Lisa Hoffleck, and I was this special advisor for Senator Kirsten Gillibrand on Asian American Pacific Islander issues. Since the beginning of the pandemic until the end of 2021, there were almost 11,000 hate incidents reported against Asian American Pacific Islander individuals. 62% of them were targeted towards women, and we've seen horrific acts against Asian American populations and communities in terms of the shootings in the shooting in Atlanta, the Atlanta spa shooting where 6 of the 9 victims were Asian American women, and most recently in Irvine, California, in the Taiwanese church. Right now, again, echoing what everyone else said, the minority populations are feeling keenly targeted and are keenly feeling the brunt of gun violence, particularly here with also the Asian American community, where we have experienced such hate and discrimination since the start of the pandemic. Blame for the pandemic, latent biases have come out into the forefront. And I, as an Asian American woman who's a mother of 5 children, 5 biracial children who are Jewish, and also one of them is transgender, during the pandemic, I was very grateful for the mask mandate, not just because it kept them safe from COVID, but because it meant that people could not see their entire faces. And that is a horrible feeling for a person to have, a horrible feeling for a parent to have. And so one of the things that the Asian American community has really been calling for right now is increased crackdown on crime and increased investment in law enforcement in terms of the tools that they will need to deal with violence and hate acts. But that doesn't mean more force in law enforcement. It means more training for law enforcement in order for them to be able to recognize and to deal with mental health issues, and also in order to deal with any violent attacks, any sort of breaks in the system. Because one of the things that we also have to think about too is if a person is in the criminal justice system, that means that other systems have failed them too. So what can we do in order to bolster our law enforcement responses in order to protect public safety? That's one of the things that we hear so much in the Asian American community right now, because we feel so very targeted. And again, though, look, repeating what Mr. Mclean said, where gang violence is a main culprit in gun violence against the African American, young African American community. For us, for Asian Americans, we need to look at the core and the root cause of the violence against our community. It is discrimination, it is bias. What can we do to try to prevent it? What you did, Senator Mayer, and your colleagues in the legislature by investing $20 million in the AAPI equity budget that would create a system where where New York State can try to track Asian American hate crimes, also in order to bring API curriculums into schools and other investments to try to create understanding amongst the communities. That goes a long way. And those are some of the things that we really need to take a look at and try to invest even more into in order to take care, in order to address this violence that is creating infection even worse than COVID-19 across all of our communities nationwide. And so I really appreciate everything that you've done. Hopefully in the upcoming in next year's session, we can invest even more money into these communities so that we can take care of these issues also. And so I thank you so much for having us here.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think what is helpful, and I know some people, Jack and I think Mary is no longer with us, but feel free to jump back in. We would like to hear you, but I do want to have those last two slides that Naomi and Nancy had, if they can come back, as to sort of, here's one of the concrete things you can do, which is to join, and it doesn't cost money, either of these groups, to become involved, get on their email list. They are building coalitions. They are building partnerships across these different grounds that we're trying to do today. And Jack may have one as well on his. So can you put that slide back up?
Yes, here we go.
So this is to join Mom's Demand, and you can text READY to 644.33. And this other material here, you can sign up and do, as they say, one small 20-minute action per week this summer. And that's the kind of thing that I hope people feel encouraged to do. It's not a huge commitment, but we do have to move towards some of these bigger solutions. I don't want to speak for you, Nancy and Naomi. Naomi, go ahead.
Move it forward, move to the next one. We take a lot of attention, both groups, on self-care, doing what you feel comfortable doing. But I'm going to suggest everybody jump in and do something. We need to impress, in particular, certain legislators that they have to move on with gun violence prevention legislation. You can phone bank, email, text to drive action. Turn anger and frustration into action. If you do any of these three, you will not be alone. If you have technical, substantive, any kind of questions, or get rattled because something isn't working, there will be someone there to answer your questions and help you along. Participate in events and rallies. When people see their friends and others doing it, they're more comfortable doing it because, again, they won't be alone. Elect candidates, help them who support gun sense laws. Look at their campaign literature, at what they're saying. Push them to be specific. Vote in primaries and general elections. You can't just sit back and say, well, they'll do it. Or the primaries aren't really important. They sure are now. We often have multiple candidates with widely different platforms. And support community organizations working to end gun violence. Nancy.
Oh, this is still your app.
Okay.
There's
Yeah,
it's a Mom's Demand. It's the Demand Action app.
Go for it. There's a lot of stuff on there. So again, this would be app 64433.
Yeah. And then lastly, you can also sign up for New Yorkers Against Gun Violence. There's their QR code and there's our link. And I just have to say, it's a wonderful feeling. Just thinking about Mary's sort of like call into the wind, like, what can I do? This can't be normal. This can't be right. When you're connected with a group and you're part of the movement, you actually don't feel hopeless. The next time something tragic happens, you just say, okay, well, that we have to get back to work. At least I know what to do next. And it definitely fights hopelessness and despair for sure.
Yes, and one of the things we do want to create is a sense of community collectively. And I know, Jack, for young people, are you still here with us?
Yeah, I'm still here.
So if you are like your age or high school, college, and you want to be part of this, what do you recommend young people do?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'd love to have you join March for Our Lives. And I can drop a link in the chat in a second about how you can go about doing that. That is a youth-led, youth-centered organization where young people, similar to Youth Over Guns, we have a lot of other youth partnerships where you can come into organization and you can really be a leader on this issue. In a direct action item, next Saturday in Cadman Plaza in Brooklyn, we are going to be leading a march across the Brooklyn Bridge, and anyone on this call is welcome to join us in solidarity with the movement. We will be calling upon lawmakers and members of New York State to really fight for gun violence prevention. So I can also send more details about that, or if you follow us on Instagram at March for Lives New York State, there's tons of details there. But yeah, I can put some in the chat in a second. That's a very direct call to action that you can take.
Thank you so much. Anyone else on the call to action of ways they can join? Certainly you can join the NAACP regardless of your race. I'm a member in many different chapters, and it is a wonderful and activist organization really dealing with the challenges of many of our communities. So that is a good thing to do. Lisa is involved with another group that is in the partisan scheme. So we're trying to keep that out of it, but oh, Nadine, I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, everyone. It's so
You made it. You are in the perfect spot. Thank you for making it. And
I'm logging on. Thank you. Thank you.
no, so you are the last of our speakers, and it's really perfect that talk a little bit about the foundation and your work and how people can channel their anger, frustration, and sadness into action, if you would.
So much going on, and right now my heart is paining because there are another killing in Mount Vernon, and it's hurting us so deeply. We really have to come together as a community. The foundation is basically helping youth in regards to scholarship and foundation, and helping youth in regards to feel wanted, feel appreciated, and what can we do in terms of if they're down or they're neglect or they're not loved, or we could help them. So the team is doing a lot of, mostly teens preparation in regards to help, get scholarship for student, help student into college, and stuff like that. We are working with a few colleges in Connecticut and other places where we could get these youngsters into college, because some of them are getting college and financial wise. So we're doing scholarship. This year we didn't do much scholarship because of the pandemic. We have so many things going on, but whatever funds we get, we distributed with helping a few items, Vernon and New Rochelle. So we are helping students getting like laptop, whatever they need for schooling and stuff like that. So, and financial wise, some students are even going out of town to get interviews for colleges. So we also assist in regards to traveling expenses and things like that for them. So we are basically helping the youth, in Westchester with kind of brighten, or, instead of just Mount Vernon, we try to Scarsdale, New Rochelle, White Plains, Mamaroneck, because Chamois used to play with those schools. So most of those students knew Chamois, and most of the school are aware who Chamois was. So we try to do more thing out of Mount Vernon, not only Mount Vernon, because she wasn't playing only for more. She was represented at high school. Even though she was 13, she was playing on the varsity team. So, that's where they mostly know her from. She used to play for the Mount Vernon itself, the elite side of Mount Vernon, where, the community section. So we're doing a lot in regards to youth and gun violence. I try to meet as possible with Moms and Man action, but sometimes it's so hard for me because it's still painful, it's still hurtful. And every time when I gather with these people, I'm tearing apart. I am so tear apart. So, but we still have to be out there to fight for our community, because, we need to help the youth, because most of the killings is the youth. They are lost, so we need them, to aware of what's going on in our community, so we could, stop gun violence. It's so painful what's going on, and we just have to come together. We just have to come together and see what we can do.
Thank you so much for really turning such terrible pain into something so, so powerful, and thank you for joining us. How do people find it? You know, I know the foundation does events and raises money for the scholarships and other things if people want to participate. There's a,
Yeah,
how
we
do
have
they find?
Shamaya Mckenzie Foundation, FDNI.org. Shamaya Mckenzie Foundation.org. It's still running and up to date. There's a section there where you could donate. There's a section also in our bio and our information, what we're doing, and all the sponsors who help us in regards to continue the foundation. So we are still there. Just go to Shamaya Mckenzie FDN.org, and it will definitely take you to the page where it's a donation, where people could assist, or people want to join the group to help in regards to fight against, you know, or they can join Moms Demand Action. You know, I always tell people to join that team because they're more out there in regards to gun violence. So my family is not as strong enough to be out there. I'm not gonna lie about it, especially myself, but I try my best to join Barry and the team as much as possible. But you know, they could always go to Shamaya Mckenzie Foundation.org. So
Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you for joining. I'm glad you got here, and it's very important to have your voice. And you know, we're talking about all these communities. I'm a Yonkers person. We've had some very terrible things in our community, in our city. And we've worked very well with the police department, and we have a very active violence interrupter program, SNUG. And we have, you know, some programs in our schools that are really helping to address some of the challenges that lead to gun violence. But I so appreciate everyone joining in here. I did want to answer some of the questions that came earlier. I know there's some questions in the chat, and
Shirley, can I just say one thing?
yes, sure,
Because you
Mark.
made a point, and I just want to emphasize this point if I got to, but building strong relationships with the police is key to our communities. We need strong, professional, empathetic policing in our communities if we're going to solve the problem of violence in our communities. And so I can say that I serve on the Community Police Partnership Board for New Rochelle, and I can say that we're doing that work, and it's hard work, and it's tough and it's tedious to build that trust. But we must, as a community and police department, reach out to each other and not turn away from each other. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would also say this, that on many of these legislative efforts to restrict access to young people and to sharpen penalties against gun violence, our police leaders are very much on the same side. And I found them to be very good partners. And I think it's one of the reasons why, as I say, it's not a partisan effort. It's not an anti-police effort. This is an American effort for the safety of all Americans. And I think to the extent that we see it again, we see it that way, we are better. So I want to answer some of the questions that were given, because some people may not know, how do we ban assault weapons? Well, we've been talking about how to get to a federal assault weapons ban, which there is an effort now to have I think far less than that as a compromise that they're working on. I don't think it's good enough. I think we have to figure out how to get to an assault weapons ban. But right now in New York State, under the SAFE Act, plus with some of the additional laws that we passed last week, we have come very far in banning high capacity magazines and making it very difficult now for those under 21 to buy a semi-automatic rifle. And what happened in Buffalo is he bought a legal gun, and then he, in New York State at age 18, went to Pennsylvania to buy a huge number of bullets and the capacity to alter the gun, and then kill 10 people simply because of their race, obviously only because of their race. It was my colleagues in Buffalo in the Senate and Assembly have been, heartbroken is not the word. They are determined, absolutely determined, and they will not be pushed back after this. This just struck to the core. So we have things we have to do. Will gun buybacks help? I'm glad, Elizabeth, you asked that. I have been a strong proponent of gun buybacks. I authored one of the major pieces of legislation in New York to encourage them. They're not perfect. They don't, solve the problem, but they are one piece of a puzzle. And when people have unlawful guns in their homes and want to get rid of them and don't know how, having a gun buyback with law enforcement, with the Attorney General's office is a very effective way. And I hope we do more of them, even if it's 5 or 10 that are turned into a church or a place. In Yonkers, we had a very effective gun buyback program. That's why I worked on that bill. So I believe it's one piece that we help limit the supply. We talked about the legislation in New York that we just adopted. I'm going to be sending out an email describing in greater detail. If you'd like to get it, make sure that you email me at my office, smayer, M-A-Y-E-R, at nysenate.gov. Regardless of whether you live in my district, I will put you on my email list and give you the description of what we have done just last week in New York. One question, how do we prevent legally purchased guns given or sold to mentally unstable people? Well, that is what Nancy was talking about, the ERPO bill, the Extreme Risk Protection Order. We adopted it in 2019. We strengthened it again this year. I've been working with the DA, Mimi Roca, to make sure that as many people know about it as possible. But that is when, now we've expanded it to a law enforcement, family member, healthcare person, or a member of law enforcement who has reason to know that someone has a gun and has a history, like the guy in Buffalo, of a mental health issue. You petition the court, a judge decides after a hearing whether you can keep that gun. But because of both suicide and the risk of gun violence, we have in New York the ability to take a gun away with a judge's decision after a hearing to determine whether there's a risk to themselves or others. That's what we want at the federal level as well. And a number of the groups on this call are working on that. What are concrete actions we can take as citizens? Well, I hope you got some of them tonight. You can join one of these bigger groups like New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, Moms Demand Action, March for Our Lives. You can also get involved locally with the Mckenzie Foundation, with the NAACP, Community Resource Center. There are opportunities here in each of our communities. And if you have questions, you can email and we'll try to give you the names of what you can do. But for those that wrote me at the beginning of this terrible last month and said, what can we do? I hope you hear that there is a community of diverse voices that wants to work on these issues together. We have a lot of work to do, as it said, and again, we can't sit back and think someone else will solve it. I'll vote once every 4 years and it'll change it. It really matters who's representing and has our voice in either at home, locality. The county this week just adopted a law George Latimer signed that requires gun stores to have additional signage in front of their stores about the risk of guns. That is a county issue. That depends on who your county legislator is. Your village, city, town legislators, your state legislators, and of course your federal legislators. These are where decisions are being made on these issues. So I hope that people will take that seriously. And again, I say put politics aside. Let's join on the same side, the American side, of safety and protection so that people don't have what Rosanna is talking about or Lisa is talking about, where you want to see your kids masked in order to ensure their safety. We want to have an America that we feel safe in. That's something that is so important to all of us. Let me just see if there's any other question before I close. I think I answered most of them, except for those that strongly disagree with the point of view we're espousing here today. That's the beauty of a democracy. Please feel free to vote your views and your conscience. But those on this call and those on this panel are committed to trying to find solutions that deal with both gun violence and the other challenges we have. So the beauty of a democracy, you can voice your views, vote your views, but I think all of us together are on the same page. So I want to thank all of our panelists. I lost Mary, and I got to give Mary credit because she was my initial instigator with some others of this program. And I do want to go around and thank Nancy, Rosanna, Naomi, Minister Mclean, Lisa Hoffleck, Natalie, Nadine, thank you so much, Jack Kelly. From my staff, Rachel Estroff, my chief of staff, Emily Lavin, my director of communications, Perla Arellano from my staff who helped make sure that we had the voices of all communities. And there's a question from Christian Rose in the chat. I'm going to do that last question and then I'm going to, what about requiring them, gun dealers, to provide materials on safe storage? Just so you know, safe storage, it was the law in Westchester County before it became the law in New York State, showing you what you can do at the local level. But what about requiring them to provide material on safe storage with every, that is a great idea. And if we don't already do that by regulation, that's something I'd be very interested in introducing as a bill next session when we go back, if I'm still in the Senate, which I hope to be. So thank you all. I really can't thank you enough for educating us, energizing us, and making us know that we can do this if we are on the same page. Thank you all very, very much. Much appreciated.